Hi, we're covering Romanesque Europe and we're going to cover Gothic Europe. This is chapters 12 and 13 in the Gardner book. To 19th century art historians, Romanesque architecture looked like a derivative of ancient Roman art, and they titled the period Romanesque, or in the Roman manner. Although there are some superficial resemblances in the roundness of architectural forms, the Romanesque period is very different from its namesake. Romanesque architecture makes use of groin vaults, which is a Roman element made of ashlar and mortar. Cement is not so used after the fall of the Roman Empire. Medieval art is chiefly concerned with religious expression and court life. Medieval architecture is mostly religious. Medieval painting and sculpture avoids naturalistic depictions. At times, medieval religions will reject images. It's a map, Western Europe around 1100. Cathedrals were sources of civic pride as well as artistic expression and spiritual devotion. Since they sometimes took hundreds of years to build and were extremely expensive, great care was lavished on their construction and maintenance. Church leaders sought to preserve structures from the threat of fire and moved away from wood to stone roofs. Rib vaults and groin vaults helped support the roofs of these massive buildings by channeling the stress of the load onto piers below. Romanesque period is more focused on the apocalypse and the Last Judgment. This is the Last Judgment, Giselbertus, West Tympanum of Saint Lazare in France. At the far left, that's in the middle part of the tympanum, just left of center, there's a trumpet blowing angel that announces the second coming or the Last Judgment. Another obliging angel boosts one of the blessed over the fortified walls of heaven. One of the devil's agents shoves the damned headfirst into the dragon mouth of hell, while another demon drags four terrified souls in. In the bottom register, underneath the central figure, the souls of the dead line up to await their fate. Two of the men carry the travel bags of pilgrims to Jerusalem and Santiago de Compostela, and consequently they can't expect to be judged favorably. The tympanum was invented to display large biblical scenes above doorways. They are more symbolic than realistic, and this was a way to convey important Christian ideas to the most illiterate population. The reliquary statue of Saint Foy or Saint Faith, late 10th to early 11th century with later additions. It's made of gold, silver, gilt, jewels, and cameos over wood core. It's 2 feet and 9.5 inches high. The enthroned image containing the skull of Saint Faith or Saint Foy is one of the most lavish Romanesque reliquaries. Many of the precious gems, antique cameos, and intaglios were donated by pilgrims and were added to the artwork. This is a reliquary of a young girl martyred in the early 4th century. She refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods in a pagan ritual. She was one of the most popular saints in southern France, ensuring the town a steady stream of pilgrims. Relics of her body were stolen from a nearby town and enthroned in Conques in 866. The child's skull is housed in the rather mannish-looking enlarged head. The head may have come from a Roman sculpture of a child repurposed to signify the victory of Christianity over paganism. Pilgrims thought relics could heal them in body and soul. Here's Saint Foy looking southeast in Conques, France. This is where the reliquary is. It's originally an abbey, but only parts of the monastery still exist. This pilgrimage church is between Spain and France. It has a cruciform plan with a barrel-vaulted nave lined with interior arches. The plan is symbolic and helped control the crowds of pilgrims by providing a route through the church toward the apse where radiating chapels holding saints' shrines could be visited. A door in the transept allowed for an easy exit after making ablutions, which is a ritual washing. Has a tympanum with the Last Judgment scene. It houses a reliquary of Saint Foy. Here's a diagram of the Romanesque church portal. The clergy considered the church doorway to be the beginning of the path to salvation through Christ. Many Romanesque churches feature didactic figural reliefs above and beside the entrance portals. The tympanum is the prominent semicircular lunette above the doorway proper, comparable in importance to the triangular pediment of a Greco-Roman temple. Voussoirs were the wedge-shaped blocks that together form the archivolts of the arch framing the tympanum. The lintel is a horizontal beam above the doorway. The turmo is the center post supporting the lintel in the middle of the doorway, and then jambs are the side posts of the doorway. This is a cathedral complex looking northeast in Pisa, Italy. The cathedral begun in 1063, baptistry 1153, the campanile began in 1174. Romanesque architecture is characterized as thick, heavy, and massive. This closely resembles early Christian basilicas with timber roof, columnar arcade, and clerestory. Separate bell towers and baptistries are Italian features. The cathedral is large, with a nave and 4 aisles. Broadly projecting transept with apses, the crossing dome, and the facade's multiple arcaded galleries distinguish it as Romanesque. Pisans wanted their bishop's church to be a monument to the glory of God and bring credit to the prosperity of the city. The campanile, this is a leaning bell tower. It's looking southeast of Pisa Cathedral in Pisa, Italy, was begun in 1174. This is the Pisa Cathedral's campanile or bell tower. It's freestanding in Italian fashion. Graceful arcaded galleries mark the tower stages and repeat the cathedral facade's motif, relating the campanile to the mother building. The tower began to lean during construction in the 12th century due to soft ground, which could not properly support the structure's weight, and it worsened through the completion of construction in the 14th century. By 1990, the tilt had reached 5.5 degrees. This is a funeral procession to Westminster Abbey, detail of the Bayeux tapestry from Bayeux Cathedral in Bayeux, France, circa 1070 to 1080. It's embroidered wool on linen, 1 foot and 8 inches high. The tapestry is a misnomer. It's actually an embroidery. It's commissioned by Bishop Otto, half-brother of William the Conqueror. It tells a story in Latin of William's conquest of England at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, a secular and not religious artwork, probably designed by a man but executed by women after the event happened. Fanciful beasts in the upper and lower registers. There's borders sometimes comment on the main scenes or show scenes of everyday life. The color used in a non-natural manner. Different parts of a horse are colored variously. It's a neutral background. Flatness of the figures, there's no shadows. The narrative tradition goes back to the column of Trajan. 175 scenes, over 600 people. It's 1,230 feet long. It has a continuous narrative tradition of medieval art. Uncertainty. There is uncertainty over how this work was meant to be displayed. Here's the Battle of Hastings. This is a detail from the Bayeux tapestry from the Bayeux Cathedral in Bayeux, France, circa 1070 to 1080. The gestures are emphatic, emotions are exaggerated, figures fill in a blank surface rather than occupy a 3-dimensional reality, hence they seem to float. Sometimes they are on tiptoe or glide across the surface, as they do in the Bayeux tapestry. This work is considered to be the best historical record of medieval warfare and clothing, as well as customs. William the Conqueror brought both the feudal system of government and the Romanesque style of art and architecture to England, where he conquered the region. Gothic Europe, north of the Alps. There's a map of Europe around 1200. Gothic architecture can be characterized as soaring, vertical, and uplifting. Rib vaults make Gothic buildings tall and stable. They are a standard vaulting practice in Gothic period. The pointed arches were devised in order to reach new heights in the nave area of the church. They used flying buttresses to stabilize tall naves. Rose windows began as an oculus on the facade of Romanesque buildings. Rose windows become an elaborate circular feature to open up wall spaces and allow more light through the facade and transepts. Gothic sculpture concentrates on the possibility of salvation. The believer is empowered with the choice of salvation. This is the west facade of Chartres Cathedral in Chartres, France, circa 1145 to 1155. The building started in 1145. A fire in 1194 forced reconstruction of everything except the facade. It's dedicated to Mary. It's a Marian shrine. Mary's tunic, worn at Jesus' birth, is the most sacred relic. It escaped the fire and was seen as a signal to rebuild the cathedral. The right spire is from 1160. The left spire is late Gothic from 1507 to 1513, conceived in a different style, which is more elaborate and more decorative. The importance of the church reflected the speed of construction, which was 26 years. Enlarged Chevet accommodated elaborate church ceremonies. The tall vertical nature of the interior pulls the viewer's eyes up to the ceiling and symbolically to heaven. Dark, mysterious interior increases the spiritual feeling. Stained glass enlivens the interior surfaces of the church. This is a plan of Chartres Cathedral, Chartres, France, as rebuilt after 1194 fire. The Chartres Cathedral plan, in which one square instead of two in each aisle flanks a single rectangular unit in the nave with a four-part vault, became the norm for high Gothic church architecture. This is an aerial view of Chartres Cathedral looking northwest. Chartres, France, is rebuilt after 1194. Architectural historians consider the rebuilt Chartres Cathedral the earliest example of high Gothic architecture. The sculptures of its two transept porches are also prime examples of high Gothic style. This is a royal portal, west facade, Chartres Cathedral, circa 1145 to 1155. The sculptures of the royal portal proclaim the majesty and power of Christ. The tympanum depict, from left to right, Christ's ascension, the second coming, and the infant Jesus in the lap of the Virgin Mary. Figures are attached to the wall behind them. These are the jam statues of the Old Testament figures on the right side of the central doorway of the royal portal of Chartres Cathedral in Chartres, France, circa 1145 to 1155. The biblical kings and queens of the royal portal are the royal ancestors of Christ. These early Gothic jam statues display the first signs of a new interest in naturalism in European sculpture. The elongated proportions echo the vertical lines of their column shafts. Gothic figures are attached to the columns. Classical statues replaced columns. Here we have Saints Martin, Jerome, and Gregory on the right jam of the right portal of the Porch of the Confessors. South transept, Chartres Cathedral, Chartres, France, circa 1220 to 1230. The south transept figures stand in front of the jam columns but are carved separately from them. The architectural setting does not determine their poses as much as it did on the west portals. This other image, St. Theodore, is a jam statue in the left portal of the Porch of the Martyrs. South transept, Chartres Cathedral, Chartres, France, circa 1230. Theodore is portrayed as the ideal knight, clothing him the cloak and chainmail armor of the 13th century Crusaders. He's in contrapposto stance, which recalls Greek statuary. The interior of the Chartres Cathedral looking east, Chartres, France, begun in 1194. Chartres Cathedral established the High Gothic model also in its three-story elevation consisting of nave, arcade, triforium, and clerestory, with stained glass windows almost as tall as the main arcade. Stonemasons and sculptors detail a stained glass window in the northernmost radiating chapel in the ambulatory Chartres Cathedral, Chartres, France, circa 1200 to 1220. Glaziers made stained glass windows by fusing layers of colored glass, joining the pieces with lead strips and painting the details in enamel. The windows transform natural light into divine light. This is a rose window and lancets, north transept, Chartres Cathedral, Chartres, France, circa 1220. Stained glass rose window, 43 feet in diameter. Immense stained glass rose and lancet windows held in place by an intricate armature bar tracery fill almost the entire facade wall of the high Gothic north transept of Chartres Cathedral. Chartres Cathedral contains 176 stained glass windows, the feature for which it may be best known. Like the sculpture, the stained glass was intended to be educational. The 5 windows of the choir hemicycle, a semicircular arrangement, relate in various ways to the Virgin Mary. This cathedral was the destination of a pilgrimage dedicated to the Virgin Mary. These are nave elevations of 4 French Gothic cathedrals at the same scale. The Gothic naves evolved from a 4-story elevation, arcade, tribune gallery, triforium, clerestory, to a 3-story elevation without tribune. The height of the vaults increased dramatically. It's a cutaway view of a high Gothic cathedral based on Amiens Cathedral. The major elements of the high Gothic formula for constructing a church in the Opus Modernum style are rib vaults with pointed arches, flying buttresses, and stained glass windows. This is a diagram and drawing of rib vault with a semicircular and then with pointed arches. Pointed arches channel the weight of the rib vaults more directly downward than do semicircular arches, requiring less buttressing. Pointed arches also made the vaults appear taller than they are. Notre Dame, looking northwest, Paris, France, begun in 1163. Nave and flying buttresses, circa 1180 to 1200, remodeled after 1225. King Philip II initiated a building boom in Paris, which quickly became the intellectual capital of Europe. Notre Dame in Paris was the first great cathedral built by using flying buttresses. Notre Dame was built on the ruins of 2 earlier churches, which were themselves predated by a Gallo-Roman temple dedicated to Jupiter. The foundation stone was laid by Pope Alexander III in 1163, and the high altar was consecrated in 1189. The choir, the western facade, and the nave were completed by 1250, and porches, chapels, and other embellishments were added over the next 100 years. And there was a late fire not that long ago in 2019 during a Notre Dame restoration. Here's a nice little information slide about the history of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Blanche of Castile, Louis IX and 2 monks, dedication page, folio 8 recto of a moralized Bible from Paris, France, 1226 to 1234. It's made of ink and tempera and gold leaf on vellum, 1 foot and 3 inches by 10.5 inches. The dedication page of this royal book depicts Saint Louis, his mother, and French Regent Blanche of Castile, a monk, and a lay scribe at work on the paired illustrations of a moralized Bible. This symbolizes Queen Blanche passing her Christian morals to her son so he can be a proper ruler. Louis IX of France, commonly known as Saint Louis, was the only king to be canonized as a saint. He was an avid collector of books such as this costly moralized Bible, an illuminated manuscript containing selections of Bible text with commentary and illustrations explaining the moral significance of the selections. People depicted are in contemporary clothing. The bright colors and rondels were influenced by stained glass windows of the period. The Rotgen Piete from the Rhineland, Germany, circa 1300 to 1325. It's painted wood, 2 feet 10.5 inches high. This statuette of the Virgin grieving over the distorted dead body of Christ in her lap reflects the increased interest during the 13th and 14th century in the Savior's suffering and the Virgin's grief, the lamentation. The statue was used for private devotion. Christ is shown emaciated. He's drained of all of his blood, all of his tissue and muscle. Horror of the crucifixion manifest. Humanizing of religious themes. Grape-like drops of Christ's blood is a reference to Christ as a mystical vineyard.